Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the Tin Man's Quarter Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm reacting to my third and final Midnight Terrors video for you guys. This was called Three Disturbing Real Movie Theater Horror Stories. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn the lights off, move the camera back up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag. Okay, here we go.
So back in community college, I worked at this small town movie theater. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy work, and I got to watch movies for free, which felt like a pretty good deal at the time.
I mean, heck, you get to watch movies for free. I'll be taking advantage of that.
Most of the people who came through were regular, everyday folks, but every now and then, you'd get someone who was just off. You know, the kind of person who gives you that weird feeling you can't shake. Anyway, there was this one guy who really took the cake. Let me set the scene for you. It was an ordinary shift, nothing unusual, and this middle-aged guy comes up to my register. He looked like someone you'd pass on the street and never notice. Average height, scruffy beard, old jacket. I wasn't expecting anything weird, but from the moment I started his order, I could feel him staring. Not just a casual glance, either. He was glaring at me, like he was studying every inch of my face. It made me so uncomfortable, I didn't even want to look up. So, I finished taking his ticket and food order, and when I hand him his change, he grabs the back of my hand and holds it for a second too long. Then he says, "Oh, I like your skin." I was so caught off guard that my brain kind of short-circuited. Like, what do you even say to that? I blurted out, "Thanks, I got it for Christmas," trying to make it a joke, but he didn't laugh.
Oh, yeah, in our movie theater, we always heard reports of weird people going in there and start fighting, and sometimes they might have a gun. So that's why when we used to go up there, we always see more extra security around there. Yeah, you just never know who will walk into a movie theater nowadays.
He just smiled, this weird, unsettling smile, like he thought I should be flattered or something. I pulled my hand back as soon as I could, finished the transaction, and practically ran to the stockroom the second he walked away. I told one of my coworkers about it, and they laughed it off like it was no big deal. I tried to do the same, but honestly, it stuck with me. Now you'd think that'd be the end of it, a one-time encounter with a creepy dude.
Right. You would think so. But I'd be going all over them coworkers and be like, no, we need to take this seriously. Keep your eyes on the security cameras on that dude and see if he tries to do something else weird. And if he does, call the cops.
But nope. That guy started showing up regularly, like every couple of months, and he always waited specifically for me. It didn't matter how long the line was, or if another cashier was open. He'd stand there and wait until it was my register. At first, I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, but after the third or fourth time, I knew it wasn't. He'd make weird comments, like asking if I was lonely or telling me he liked my voice. I started dreading every shift, worried he'd show up. Eventually, I started avoiding him whenever I could. If I saw him walk in, I'd find a reason to go to the stockroom or have someone else cover the register. And for a while, that worked. But then he caught on. One day, I was stocking candy behind the counter, and I thought I was alone. My coworkers were in the storage room, but the door was open, so they could hear me if I called out. Out of nowhere, I hear these heavy footsteps, and when I look up, he's running down the hallway toward me. My stomach dropped. I froze, genuinely not sure what he was about to do. Luckily, my coworker, this big 6-foot-tall guy, stepped out of the storage room at just the right moment. As soon as the guy saw him, he stopped dead in his tracks, mumbled something under his breath, and walked away like nothing happened. My coworker asked if I was okay, but I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because what else do you say?
No, she ain't fine. That guy was literally gonna grab her. But luckily, he showed up and made him stop.
Inside, though, I was freaking out. From that point on, his behavior got even worse. He'd follow me around the theater, pretending to be interested in the movie, but clearly keeping an eye on me. Once, I caught him lurking near the employee bathroom when I was about to go in. Another time, he tried to follow me upstairs to the projection room. It felt like no matter where I went in that building, he was there, watching. I told my manager, but all they did was tell me to let them know if it escalated further. Like, wasn't it already escalated enough? The worst night, though, was when he waited for me outside after my shift. If you've ever worked at a movie theater, you know the late night shifts can stretch past midnight because you have to clean up after the last showing.
Sure.
That night, I got off around 1 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars here and there, including mine. As I'm walking to my car, I notice an engine running a few rows over. I glance that way, and sure enough, it's him. He's sitting in his car, smiling at me through the windshield. My heart started racing. I pretended I didn't see him and kept walking, but then I heard his car door open. I turned my head just enough to see him getting out and heading straight for me. That's when the panic kicked in. I ran like my life depended on it.
There you go. I was about to say that. Run to your car and crank it up and get out of there.
I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my entire life. By the time I got to my car, I was fumbling with my keys, hands shaking so badly it took me a second to unlock the door. I finally managed to get in, lock the doors, and start the engine. He stopped a few feet away, glaring at me with this intense, almost angry look, like he was mad I'd gotten away. Then, just as calmly as he'd gotten out, he turned around and walked back to his car. He sat there for a few more minutes, just staring at me, before finally driving off. The next day, I told my manager everything. This time, they took it more seriously and told me to call the police if he ever showed up again. Thankfully, he didn't. Maybe he got bored, or maybe he realized I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. Either way, I'll never forget how scared I felt that night.
I know you probably were scared. I mean, my stomach and nerves will be rolling heavy if somebody just kept on trying to follow me. But also, I'm glad you called your manager about it. But man, they should have called the cops then just to investigate anyway and tell him if he does come back, we will not only want him trespassed, we want him arrested for harassing one of the workers. I mean, that's what I'd be doing if I was the manager.
When I was in high school, I used to catch late night movies at the mall with my friends. Usually a whole group of us would go, but on this particular night, it was just me and my buddy Alex. We picked a show that started pretty late, and because the film wasn't some big blockbuster, the theater was close to empty.
You know, that's another thing. I never heard of a movie theater inside of a mall. But anyway, let's continue on with the story.
At first, I figured we'd have the place to ourselves, which sounded great. Prime seats and no crowds. We settled into the center row, right where we like to sit for the best view. Not long after, a couple wandered in, and despite nearly every seat being open, they decided to sit just 2 seats away from us, same row, leaving only a small gap between us. I glanced at Alex, and we both exchanged puzzled looks. But hey, maybe they just wanted the sweet spot for viewing. Soon, the lights dimmed, and the previews began. At first, everything was normal, but I started noticing something unsettling. The woman from the couple kept glancing at me and Alex. I tried to brush it off. Sometimes people get distracted or curious, especially in a nearly empty theater. But this woman wasn't just glancing. She'd turn her head all the way around to look straight at us, as if she were openly staring. It was so blatant I couldn't pretend not to notice. I nudged Alex. "Hey, you seeing this?" I whispered, keeping my eyes on the screen. He just nodded and whispered back that it had been going on for a while. Tension coiled in my gut, and I started feeling more anxious by the minute. I considered leaving early, but Alex was determined to see the movie through, and I wasn't about to leave him. Plus, I was the one driving us home. The woman continued her odd behavior, turning to whisper something to the man she was with. He never once glanced our way, which made it even weirder. Eventually, the movie ended, and I practically leapt out of my seat. Alex was right behind me. We hurried out of the auditorium into the mall corridor, ready to put some distance between us and that couple. Because it was so late, the mall was practically deserted. Just as I was about to turn to Alex and comment on how creepy the whole situation had been, the doors behind us flew open, and the same couple appeared, hurrying out right after us. My heart rate kicked up a notch. Alex and I silently decided to speedwalk toward the parking structure. Neither of us was eager to find out why they seemed so determined to keep up with us.
It's probably just a weird, strange couple. They might be potential kidnappers or people that were planning on robbing you. Who knows, right? They need to hurry up, get to their car quick.
We reached my car, a black Scion, nothing flashy, and hopped in. I cranked the engine, adrenaline making my hands shake. As we pulled out of the parking space, we saw the couple getting into a blue car on the same level. The coincidence didn't surprise me at first, because that was the main garage level everyone used. Trying not to appear rattled, I backed out and headed for the exit ramp. Once we reached the street, I asked Alex to keep an eye out, and he turned around to check. For a moment, it seemed like we were in the clear. A few minutes later, though, a car came zooming up behind us with its high beams on, practically blinding me in the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. "Is it blue?" I asked Alex, my voice shaky. He squinted but couldn't tell under the glare. I decided to make a turn at the next light to see if they'd follow. Sure enough, they turned too, and when I got a quick look, my suspicions were confirmed. It was the same blue car. My brain went into overdrive. I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the dark suburban roads, and they matched most of my moves, not tailgating, but definitely maintaining pursuit. The streets were deserted except for the two of us, so there was no question we were being followed. I veered into Alex's neighborhood, but instead of pulling onto his street, I kept going. I hoped to shake them by weaving through the quiet residential roads. The blue car stuck behind us, gradually inching closer. Alex was asking me, voice trembling, "What are we going to do?"
Well, I would have been telling my passenger to get their phone out and call the cops and tell them that there's a car following us on this certain road, and then see if they can get a unit to follow them quickly, just so they could get off our tail.
I didn't have a solid plan. All I knew was that I didn't want them to see where we lived. We tore down another side street, then I spotted an intersection up ahead. If I could just turn the corner fast enough, maybe I could find a place to hide. I took the turn sharply, and the car behind us had to slow down a bit. Seizing the moment, I flipped my headlights off and killed the engine, coasting into a free parking space near the curb. Since my car was a manual, I managed to slip it into neutral and roll in without the engine running. I signaled Alex to duck. He pushed his seat forward, and I reclined mine all the way back, trying to make us invisible from the outside. My heart was thundering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Within moments, the blue car came around the corner, creeping by at a snail's pace. It was surreal. Just the glow of their headlights floating past, and for a second, I thought we were done for. But apparently, our car blended in well with the others parked on the street. The blue car continued on, not realizing we were right there. We stayed hunched down for a good 10 minutes, neither of us daring to breathe too loudly. When we were finally convinced they hadn't doubled back, we slowly rose in our seats, exchanged stunned looks, and let out deep sighs of relief. It was the strangest, scariest encounter I'd ever had. To this day, I have no idea what that couple wanted, Maybe they thought it was a funny prank, or maybe they had something more sinister in mind.
I don't think that would have been a funny prank right there, because you probably would have ended up making them run into like a light post or another car just for them accelerating from you two. No, they're up to something else. They're probably following you just to see where you lived and then probably rob you later. But I'm glad you guys did the right thing and hid among other cars and just ducked. And they just probably thought you just sped off further down the road, and they pretty much said, all right, forget it. But yeah, that is scary. Seems like you just can't go to a movie theater anymore without being followed.
During my junior year of high school, my group of friends and I got into the habit of poking around abandoned buildings. We were a fairly large crew, usually 6 to 10 of us, especially on weekends. Something about testing our courage in places no one else wanted to go gave us a little thrill. One summer, we found our favorite spot, an old, shuttered movie theater on the far west side of town. From the outside, the building looked like a relic of better days. The marquee letters were missing. The big glass doors were shattered and covered with plywood. A few faded no trespassing signs were still clinging to the entrances, and the side exits had heavy locks, except most of them were broken or rusted. We'd heard rumors that homeless people had been using the place for shelter, which only added to the creepy factor. But we were young, curious, and sure we were untouchable. We did a few cautious walkthroughs when we first discovered it. We'd wait until late, usually around midnight or 1 in the morning, so nobody would spot us lurking around. On those initial visits, there were at least 8 of us, wandering through the echoing hallways and shining flashlights into every dusty corner. The inside was torn to pieces. Every movie screen was shredded, the rows of seats vandalized or ripped out, and grimy walls covered in graffiti. In some of the auditoriums, we'd find shopping carts stuffed with cans, soiled blankets, and empty liquor bottles. We never bumped into anyone, but we felt their presence through these leftovers. It wasn't exactly safe, but that was half the appeal. After 2 or 3 of these group explorations, we started feeling overconfident. We'd mapped out most of the corridors in our minds, the old projection booths, the maintenance hallways, the strangely cramped manager's office upstairs. So one night, we decided to create a dare. We'd split into pairs, and each pair would enter from the front, stay for 5 minutes, and then exit through a designated door around back, where the rest of us would be waiting.
Sounds like a good plan, but here's the thing. I'm glad he brought some friends with him, because there's no way I would go into an abandoned building like this. Especially don't want to go in there without any flashlights. But let's continue.
It sounded simple enough, just a test of our nerve. There were 6 of us that night. Me, Jack, Beck, Doug, Brad, and Drew. Beck and Doug volunteered to go first. The rest of us loitered near a side exit that we'd propped open earlier. 5 minutes passed, then 6, then 7. We were starting to get uneasy when finally, Beck and Doug burst out of the door, breathing heavily. They told us they'd headed straight upstairs to the manager's office, only to find signs someone had recently claimed it. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, plus a couple of paper bags with unknown items inside. The place smelled musty, like stale sweat. Feeling creeped out, they tried to leave immediately, but in the dark, they got turned around and nearly walked into a sealed exit. For a moment, they thought they heard footsteps or soft scraping behind them, so they froze, convinced someone was following. It took them a minute to gather enough courage to move again, and that's when they finally made it out. Of course, Jack and I wouldn't be deterred so easily. We were set on doing our turn. Brad and Drew, who had planned to go last, decided they wanted to come in with us too. So the 4 of us headed in together, leaving Beck and Doug behind to keep watch. Stepping inside this time felt different. Maybe it was because the group was smaller, or because we knew someone might actually be living there. The open lobby stretched out before us, strewn with trash and bits of broken tile. We headed for the same stairwell Doug had described, determined to see if that sleeping bag was still up there. Just as we reached the bottom of the stairs, a heavy thud reverberated through the building. It sounded like something metal banging against concrete, or maybe someone slamming a door. We froze, exchanging nervous looks. Jack muttered that it had to be Beck and Doug messing with us, trying to send us scurrying back out. None of us wanted to admit how it made our hearts race. When we got upstairs, the banging suddenly stopped. There it was, the sleeping bag, unrolled on the office floor, with a few paper sacks sitting around it. Brad aimed his flashlight inside one of the bags and blanched when he saw a syringe, along with some other item that looked suspiciously like it had been jury-rigged into a weird device. The mood shifted instantly. Jack made some awkward joke about how we might be stumbling into a weird situation, but nobody laughed. We didn't linger much longer.
Yeah, because you don't know if you're walking into a situation where a homeless person might be waiting to defend his home. At this point, you might as well just turn around and go.
The tension in the air felt suffocating. Then the banging started again, this time louder, echoing in the darkness. We agreed, without a word, that it was time to bail. We headed down the stairs, adrenaline pounding in our veins, half expecting someone, or something, to jump out at us. The moment we reached the exit, we threw the door open to find Beck and Doug waiting for us, wide-eyed. "Did you see him?" Doug asked, voice trembling. Apparently, about a minute after we'd gone inside, a tall, haggard-looking man with unkempt hair had appeared and passed them by, heading for the front entrance. Beck had tried to say hello, but the guy stopped, turned, and made this sudden lurch forward, like he was ready to pounce. One side of his face looked heavily scarred. Beck guessed it might have been from severe burns. They tried to warn us by pounding on the door, but we never heard them. The mere thought that this stranger was in there with us, lurking around in the dark, sent a chill through my spine. We decided we'd had enough excitement for one night. Gathering ourselves, we made for the parking lot of a nearby Fred Meyer, where we'd left our cars. But we only made it halfway before headlights swept across us, and a police cruiser rolled in, red and blue lights flickering on. The officer stepped out, ordered us to sit in the glow of his spotlight, and asked what we were doing out so late. We gave him a watered-down version of the truth. We were curious about the theater, but got spooked by some tall guy who walked in. The officer gave us a long, steady look, then shook his head. He mentioned that there had been violent incidents at the old theater, and warned us that it was genuinely unsafe. We all nodded, pretending like we understood only now how risky it was. After a stern lecture, he let us go. As we pulled out of the lot, we spotted him shining his flashlight into the building's broken entrance, presumably to check it out himself. That was our final visit to the abandoned theater. We never did figure out who that tall man was, or why he acted so aggressively toward Beck. Maybe he was simply defending his makeshift home, or maybe there was more to it. Regardless, we heeded the officer's advice and left urban exploring behind us, or at least we avoided places where we might find real people instead of just cobwebs.
Well, thank God that cop understood what they're doing. If a cop tells you not to go back to that place, that's lesson learned right there. Don't go back. But yeah, that guy might be right. That homeless guy was trying to protect his makeshift home. He was trying to make sure no delinquents would be hanging around. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more midnight terrors reactions like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I said that's a wrap, and have a nice day, y'all.